Good evening. That is unmerited applause, but I'm grateful for it. My name is Stephen Dunbar-Johnson, and as President International at the New York Times, it is my great pleasure to be your MC this evening at the first New York Times debate at the PSIA Youth and Leaders Summit. Our debates are in partnership with an organization called Debatable, and we at the New York Times have curated these kind of debates now all around the world, which is why I'm particularly pleased that we're bringing it to Paris. We've curated this debate in Glasgow at COP, in Sharm el-Sheikh at COP, in Dubai at COP, and for the past 5 years, we've had a debate which I think, in an unbiased fashion, has been the most interesting thing at Davos. Certainly that's been the feedback we've been getting. As a partner and enthusiastic supporter of the YNL Summit since its inception, we are really delighted to bring our debate format here to today to conclude today's proceedings. So let me just try and explain that the New York Times Debatable series is intended to create a space for balanced, nuanced, and respectful argumentation where we can all disagree well. An attribute that is in short supply in our increasingly polarized world, where inflammatory and entrenched opinions tend to eclipse other perspectives. Where, ladies and gentlemen, it's as important, if not more important, to listen deeply and appreciate where points of view are coming from. Points of view that differ from our own, and to recognize that often compromise is the foundation of progress. So, ladies and gentlemen, our motion this evening is a controversial one. They should always be controversial. Do we still need the United Nations? You are all invited to actively participate by using the summit's online conversation called poll.is. Please scan the QR code. Where is the QR code? It's not there. Next slide. You are actively encouraged to scan the QR code behind me and share your opinions about the debatable motion. Do we still need the United Nations? You can agree or disagree with statements uploaded by others. As always, please remain respectful with your comments. I understand the conversation will close tomorrow at 5 p.m. and insights gathered will nurture the closing panel with Christina Galash, discussing the ideas of the next generation. So do make sure you contribute between now and then. Now, before I set the rules of the debate, I would like to invite our student jurors, and I'll explain their role in a minute, or after they've spoken, Deniz and Elena, to come on stage to introduce our debaters and to frame the motion. Thank you. Please give them a round.
Good evening, everyone. I am Elena Kloppe, and I have the pleasure of introducing Group A, arguing in favor of the motion tonight. Let us start with their opening statement. Are you ready? Yes. Born out of the devastation of World War II, the United Nations stands for a bold premise that dialogue can triumph over destruction. Its charter contains visionary aspirations, but the United Nations was not created to bring us to heaven, but to save us from hell. Over its 80 years, the UN has saved countless people from hell, from the horrors of war, displacement, disease, and injustice. From averting famine to preventing nuclear proliferation, containing or even eradicating diseases, managing climate change, to educating millions of children, the United Nations system forms a vital global safety net. Its peacekeepers transform zones of conflict into communities of peace. In the last 80 years, UN membership has grown from 51 to 193, while the world's population has almost quadrupled. Across the world, people see the UN as a beacon of hope. The General Assembly serves as humanity's town hall with a policy of one nation, one vote. Yet, the United Nations also navigates a world of rising challenges and growing fragmentation. Its Security Council reflects a world order stuck in 1945, with 5 countries wielding veto power over critical issues of peace and security. Secretary General Antonio Guterres has long called for comprehensive reforms to make UN more responsive to today's challenges. At the September Summit for the Future, states agreed to reform the UN's governance to better reflect the world as it is now. This includes expanding the Security Council, reforming the international financial system, and creating new frameworks for global governance of AI, ensuring these technologies benefit all. The summit also addressed financing for development and the environment, emphasizing the need for a more inclusive approach to global finance. So, as we ask ourselves if the UN is still needed, what other organization could simultaneously field peacekeepers in South Sudan, provide life-saving medical care to displaced people in Afghanistan, or monitor peace implementation in Colombia? What other entity could lead on the sustainable development goals to build inclusive societies and protect the environment? No other entity has the United Nations global legitimacy, reach, or commitment to peace, human rights, and a more prosperous world. As the first debater of the group, I am delighted to welcome Melissa Fleming. Melissa Fleming is the Under-Secretary General for Global Communications to the United Nations. Some of you may also know her as the host of Awake at Night, one of my favorite podcasts. And Melissa Fleming has spent her entire career communicating for a more just, safer, and empathetic world. Be it as a journalist when she was our age, or as the head of global communications at UNHCR. Please give her a very warm welcome. Our second speaker is Stefano Sannino. Stefano Sannino served as Secretary General of the European External Action Service at the European Union. He has held so many diplomatic positions that it would take us the entire evening listing them all, but one thing is certain, Mr. Sannino has indeed hands-on experience in tackling global challenges. We're honored to have you both with us tonight. Thank you for being here.
Good evening, distinguished panelists, esteemed guests, and fellow students. It is a great privilege to welcome you all here tonight. My name is Deniz Gezer, and I'm currently in the Human Rights and Humanitarian Action Master at PSIA. This evening, I have the distinct honor of introducing Group B. In response to the question, do we need the UN? We will argue the UN, in its current form, is no longer fit for purpose. Indeed, only if it undergoes significant reforms could it become relevant again. As we transition into a post-unipolar world, the relevance of multilateralism remains undiminished. However, multipolarity alone will not ensure a more effective United Nations. For multilateralism to thrive, decision-making must be perceived as representative. And no nation, regardless of its military or economic power, should be above the law. Over the past 80 years, the UN's agenda has expanded significantly, resulting in a complex and fragmented international machinery. This has led to the ineffective management by its membership and its secretariat, leaving critical crises in Syria, Gaza, Ukraine, and Sudan unaddressed. The recent failure of the COP29 conference and the premature exhaustion of the Secretariat's budget in 2024 highlight the UN's inability to tackle global challenges, such as pandemics, climate change, refugee crisis, violent extremism, terrorism, and the regulation of the artificial intelligence. The Pact for the Future and the G20 Rio Declaration both express strong support for the UN reform, with a clear priority on expanding the Security Council and improving climate governance. Many governments and civil society groups advocate for a charter review under the Article 109. The UN High-Level Advisory Board on Effective Multilateralism also recommends this, despite the risks to the status quo, particularly the privileges enjoyed by the Permanent Group of 5 Security Council veto holders. The objective is now clear. The UN must reform itself and rejuvenate its charter for a new era, both to become fit for purpose again and to ensure that it uses resources efficiently. The alternative to robust multilateralism is either a world of continued erosion of respect for international law or a multi-order international disorder. It will be irresponsible and a step backward for civilization to allow multilateralism to deteriorate in either of these directions. With that being said, allow me to begin by introducing our esteemed speakers. First, it is my pleasure to present Mr. Hugh Dugan, former Senior Director for International Organization Affairs on the U.S. National Security Council. With a career spanning decades, Mr. Dugan has dedicated his expertise to examining the intricate mechanisms of the United Nations, shedding light on its operations and the challenges it faces fulfilling its global mission. Our second speaker is Antonio Patriota, the current ambassador of Brazil to the United Kingdom. Ambassador Patriota brings a wealth of experience as a seasoned diplomat, having engaged directly with the complex political dynamics within the United Nations system. It's an absolute honor, ladies and gentlemen, to have such distinguished individuals with us tonight, and I look forward to their valuable perspectives. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Deniz and Elena. The motion has well and truly been framed. So it's up to our debaters to make the case for and against our motion. And it's going to be up to you, the audience, to decide using the highly sophisticated New York Times clapometer technology, which is essentially me deciding which side of the motion receives the loudest applause after all the arguments have been made. Please remember, part of the ethos of this debate is that our debaters are not necessarily speaking from a place of personal opinion. They are being assessed on their intellectual performance and ability to persuade, and may very well be arguing against their own personal conviction. You don't know. So please, our wonderful audience, do lean into the theatrics of this moment and encourage the debaters as much as you can by clapping and cheering and generally being as noisy as possible when they make a good point. Actually, let's just have a little warm-up and get you into the swing of things. For those of you who think constructive, respectful debate is essential for a functioning democracy, please clap now. You have, that was okay, but we want more of that as we go through. So listen up, here are the rules. The first debaters from each side of the motion will come up and stand at these respective podiums. The team member for the for team will speak first, followed by the against team. The for team debater will remain at the podium whilst the against team debater makes his or her case. Then the second debaters for each side of the motion will come up to their respective podiums, and again, both must remain at the podiums to make their case and to listen to the counter-arguments. This is important. Each speaker has up to 5 minutes. We have a wonderful clock master who's going to be sitting in the middle with, yes, give a round of applause. Debaters, a warning. We will be vigilant. I will be vigilant with the time. So please watch the clock or you risk being cut off. I am the autocrat in the room this evening. Once everyone has presented their arguments, our esteemed jury, who you've already heard from, will come up and directly speak to the debaters for up to 2 minutes or 2.5 minutes each, no more, no more. Jury is a little bit of a misnomer because, in fact, they are going to refrain from judging. You are going to be, instead, you are encouraged to present the debaters with challenges and highlight their blind spots, which I'm sure you'll be excellent at. You must engage directly with the arguments presented, not contest their general position, okay? After the jury have imparted their wisdom, we will have a very short break of 2 minutes to allow our debaters to digest what they've heard from our jury members and prepare their final retorts, and they will nominate someone from their team to present those final retorts. Their nominee will have no more than 2 minutes, Madam Watch Lady, for their final rebuttals. Then the audience, that's you will then decide, okay? So, again, please, when you pick your side, try to suspend your own bias and consider which side made a better case, which side injected the most passion and the art of persuasion to sway you. I hope that's all clear. I will try and steer us through it. If not, the first debaters, are you ready? Please come up, both come up to the podium. So the debater for the motion will start. Okay. You will have 5 minutes. The clock, we'll start the clock. Let's wait for the clock to start. And we're off.
Thank you so much, and it's great to see you, and it's great to see such a show of force of students because that demonstrates your interest in the UN. And I hope to make the case for you for why the UN, imperfect as it is still needed. As I was introduced, you heard that I've spent my career working for the UN, and I've been on the front lines of UN staff who actually work on the front lines day in and day out, who've sacrificed the comforts of family and safety to deliver for people who have lost everything. I mean, most currently, if you think about the situation in Gaza, we have scores of staff from multiple agencies there keeping 2 million people alive. There are many other examples. I remember being at UNHCR in Uganda at the border of South Sudan and seeing arrivals of refugees who were fleeing for their lives, mothers barefoot, children naked. I have never seen anyone so emaciated, could barely walk. And who was there to receive them? The government of Uganda did not have the means. They provided the land. They said, UNHCR, build the tents. WFP, provide the food. WHO, please save these children. They are highly malnourished. I've seen human rights defenders monitoring in Syria, for example, the crimes that maybe today, hopefully now that the Assad regime has finally fallen, will come to light and there will be justice and no impunity. I've seen peacekeepers who are at many times also risking their lives, but there is so much evidence and reports that where peacekeepers are, many fewer civilians will die and so many better chances there are to achieve peace. I have seen in my travels also climate work. I mean, we heard before that the UN has not achieved its goal in saving our planet from the existential threat of climate change, which is so real. But I can tell you the agreement, the Paris Agreement, was negotiated by the UN. And the Paris Agreement has reduced emissions, and it has lowered the temperature, and it has imposed a blueprint on states and companies and the world, and keeps that pressure up. The final thing I'd like to say is, there are so many things about the UN. It sets norms. It stops diseases. It eliminated smallpox. It is there when outbreaks are there, and when works to contain them. But it's also cheap. It costs about $3 billion to run the UN, and that is about as much as a bag of potato chips. So for the population of the world, which is about 8 billion, that is $1.25. And I think the UN is much healthier for us than the bag of potato chips. So it is value for money. Thank you.
The case for the UN being the worst marketed miracle in the world. Can we reset the clock? Sir, the floor is yours.
Was that less than 5 minutes?
You've got 2 more seconds.
Oh, okay. If that was less than 5 minutes, I'd like to reserve the balance of the time. You can. Thank you. I'm going to need it. It's quite a crowd. I'm going to get thirsty. Let me just take a drink of water. Okay. Now, how many of you think the glass is half full? Hands? Hands? How many think it's half empty? Come on, be brave. Vote. Okay. Okay, when you graduate, you're going to realize that the diplomatic answer is that it's both. Right? No need to choose, right? The Olympics were a global standard of international cooperation, and my wife is with me. We came to Paris those 3 weeks, and it demonstrates the power of good preparation, organization, administration on behalf of Paris and the Olympic Committee. In contrast, the poorly delivered Beijing and Tokyo Games were in fact invisible. It just goes to show you that it is not good when the spirit is strong, but the bureaucracy is weak. There was a UN before there was a UN organization. The United Nations were the the Allied states in World War II. So I'm going to reframe the question a little bit tonight. Do we need the United Nations organization? My point here is that while the spirit for international cooperation is strong, the UN organization is weak. Actually, beyond weak, it has become a drag on the post-World War II impulse for peace, security, development, and human rights. Who needs the extra drag? It's hard enough. So I have to argue the unpopular option here tonight. Sorry to be the one to release a little bit of helium out of our idealistic balloons. Let's take it as an opportunity for keeping our feet on the ground and our shared pursuit of enhancing international cooperation. I appreciate very much the remarks made by the pro side just now. They're really drawing upon our basic human interests to see progress, security, peace, and human rights respected. We have to be clinical as well. We have to let our emotions take us so far, and if those things are very serious, then organizationally and analytically and bureaucratically, we have to be very clinical about how we get from A to B. So do we need the United Nations organization? The answer is yes, but no. Yes, we need the spirit of the Allied United Nations. As long as there is a UN table, states find it better to come to the table in lieu of being on the menu. But today's underperforming and underwhelming UN organization is losing its reputation for effectiveness and efficiency in its considerations and operations. The organization has become, what we say in the US, has become a deep state. To perpetuate bureaucracy above effectiveness, outputs instead of outcomes. That puts the power to convene at risk. Time is too short here to take an inventory of all of its woes. But I have to say the very first reason for this is that the member states themselves have been very poor stewards, have not exercised the type of managerial oversight and attention required. They're very taken with the exciting topics of the Security Council or making the front page of the New York Times. Is that okay? So what's happened then? The Secretary General, their employee, has been given a lot of freedom over time to fill in the gaps and to interpret his role. And I believe that he's judged the political interests of member states more than being interested in administrating better their organization. The office, in fact, has eclipsed the senior-most figure of the organization. I'm not going to ask you who you think that is, but it's the President of the General Assembly, who holds the senior-most protocol role in the organization, has been eclipsed by the Secretary General over time. The lifelong Secretary bureaucrats have quarantined the effectiveness of the President by denying his office proper resources out of the $3.7 billion budget. The Office of the President of the General Assembly gets $250,000 out of $3.7 billion. He has to go hand in hand raising money to run his office and meet payroll. We should think of having a GoFundMe campaign for the President of the General Assembly, believe it or not. And this has been the case for many years. This has enabled the Secretary General to become much more of a political actor than intended by the UN Charter. And this is to the detriment of being a good administrator. This has led us to the UN's irrelevance, maybe corruption.
Comes in. I'm
Oh, I'm sorry, that went too long.
I'm going to have to cut you off.
All right.
Please give him a round. Thank you. Our second set of debaters, please come to the podium. Can we reset the clock? Can we reset the clock?
I think that in a world that has become much more complex and difficult to read, the best thing is to go back to simplicity and to what really matters and what can be done in order to get things better. We have gone from a world which has been bipolar for many years to a world which has become multipolar. And finally, we are getting now into a world which is becoming more chaotic than everything else. And in this chaotic world that we are living through, one of the things that seems to become very popular is the strength of might and the rules of the strength. And this is what we have seen with the Russian occupation of Ukraine. That's unfortunately what we see over time in what is happening when you become too strong and you do not abide by the rules that we ourselves have given to ourselves. Maybe I'm coming from an experience which is very European, because I've worked most of my life in the European Union. And we have learned that the member states, the 27 member states, are making a union of minorities. And that essentially, if you do not have rules that are protecting the minorities, then someone will abuse this system. And that's a little bit the essence of multilateralism. And that's maybe when we think about an efficient multilateralism, we are thinking first of all about United Nations. Now, I understand that when you think about United Nations, we think about New York and we think about the Secretary General. But I think that we have just met with the Director General of the WTO, which has spoken about the multilateral trade system. Maybe you may have seen the Director General of the Human Rights Commission, or you may have seen the Director of the HCR and of the IOM, which are working for refugees and for migrants. You may have met the Director of UNRWA, which is working for the Palestinian people, giving the backbone of the health and education to the Palestinian boys and girls. And that's what we don't have to forget. We have to remember what United Nations in its entirety are able to do. And I'm not saying that everything is perfect. On the contrary, we, in our own statement, we advocated for changing and reforming the UN and making it more fit for the purpose. But sorry, I beg to disagree with the fact that having a few members more in the Security Council will make the system more democratic and more efficient. And you yourself have said that at the end of the day, maybe you have to give more power to the General Assembly, which I think is what is happening, because essentially the Security Council is blocked, and now it's much more the General Assembly which is becoming the loudspeaker of the world. And we are all rushing around trying to get the votes of all the countries in the world in order to support our points of views. So I think that we need to be clear about the fact that the challenges that we have in front of us, the global challenges, are huge, and that we have to work in order to solve them, but we have also to be aware that this is not UN that can solve all the problems of the world, and that can address them, it can provide support and help, as we were saying about the artificial intelligence provide, for example, set of rules. But this does not mean that is the magician that is able to solve all the issues and all the problems. And that is why I think that the system in itself, it's important because it's helping in all these areas. And maybe it has become a deep state, but to be fair, I think that it's much better to have a deep state than some autocratic crazy person in charge of it. Thank you very much.
Press this button. Is it on? Yes, is that on? No. Pause the clock. Yes, now. Okay. Thank you for including me in this debate. Thank you, Arantxa. Pleasure to be here. My son graduated from Sciences Po, so I'm very honored. Let me start. No, let me start by saying I believe we're living in very dangerous times. You're all familiar with the tipping point concept when it comes to climate and global warming. Well, I believe we're not only facing a climate tipping point, we are facing a systemic tipping point. And why is that? Because we have systematic, frequent violations of international law with impunity, and we have mechanisms that are demonstrating on a day-to-day basis their dysfunctionality. So, whereas I would argue that the world would be much worse off if the United Nations did not exist, I believe that we need to raise awareness internationally that we cannot continue as it is. The world is transitioning to a post-unipolar moment, to a more multipolar distribution of power. We need more representative mechanisms. So just as the G20 evolved from the G7 or G8 after the world economic crisis in 2008, I think the time has come to expand the Security Council to include regions of the world that are not participant. Just as in a domestic parliament, it would be considered undemocratic, for example, if in Italy, Sardinia, or Sicily were not represented in their parliament, wouldn't it? Well, the same applies to the Security Council today. Africa, Latin America, not represented among the permanent member categories. So this is an obvious area for reform, but there's another very obvious area for reform. When the United Nations Charter was negotiated in 1945, climate was not an issue for any of us. Today, I think it is necessary to introduce into the preamble of the Charter our collective responsibility towards the planet and to establish a permanent mechanism to deal with surveillance and policy monitoring. Now, this year, Brazil, my country, will be hosting COP30. But we believe that the process, the COP process, is starting to outlive its usefulness. Among other reasons, it creates the impression that you should only worry about the climate during November, when it is a topic that we need to be concerned about the entire year. So just as the Human Rights Committee evolved into the Human Rights Council, we need a permanent climate council. And this would be something that we'd like to see incorporated into the Charter. Brazil, along with India and South Africa, are proposing a Charter review conference under Article 109 of the Charter. This has never happened before, but we believe that the time is correct to undertake this initiative. And by the way, it is also supported by many segments in civil society. It was also a recommendation by the high-level advisory board that the UN Secretary General convened. Now, the good news is that we know that reform is possible in a more flexible, less institutionalized mechanism such as the G20. We expanded, we reformed. So let's believe in reform. And when people talk about the deep state, I'd like to argue that there's a benign deep state. The Secretariat of the UN can be precisely that, a group of professionals that resist undue political pressure, that stand up for the Charter, that stand up for a single standard in the implementation of international law, rather than double standards as we see on a daily basis. This is what we would like to see, and I think we need to also think of maybe changing a little bit the profile and the method of selecting the UN Secretary General. So I would strongly submit that the time is right to select the first female UN Secretary General. In addition to this, I would defend the idea of a single mandate, perhaps a longer mandate. We can discuss the year, because the idea of investing a lot of political energy in re-election is something that I think takes away from the Secretary General's authority. So in a world of erosion of international law, we don't want to go to pre-Westphalian mode where might makes right. We need international law, we need cooperation, but we need representative mechanisms for taking decisions, and we need more diversity, the true mosaic of international representation in the UN Secretariat, and gender equality.
Bang on time, bang on time. So, jury members, we would like you to now come up and give your brief counsel to our debaters about what you've heard, any blind spots, or anything else you want to talk about in terms of their argumentation. And you're going to have about 1.5 minutes each, okay? Who wants to go first? You don't have to have that long, you can, but you have up to 1.5 minutes each. Who's going to go first?
Okay, so first of all, I'm going to point out some arguments that I found very interesting because they were overarching and also linking to the opening statements. I think it was really interesting that both themes have converged on the need for change and the need for reform. And also linking that to the opening statements they had, it's striking to see that they both use the Summit of the Future and Back to the Future to support their arguments, but in opposite ways, because the Group A, so 4, used these initiatives as evidence that the UN indeed is relevant still and functional because it has this internal need for change. And Group B said that indeed it's no longer fit for purpose because we are doing all of these initiatives and like the Back to the Future, Global Digital Compact and so on. So I saw this tension that maybe one of the blind spots could be more explored on the A side, so the Group A, could be maybe having more acknowledgement of the limitations of their own position. Of course, we know all the positive things that UN does, but it could have been also beneficial for the Group A team to not rely so much on all the achievements and accomplishments without addressing all the failures, because it could give more credibility to their own arguments. And that's it. I'm sorry.
Don't forget, Faith, you're absorbing all these points because you're going to have to think about them for your final rebuttals. Next juror.
First of all, thank you so much for all your good commentaries and insights. Firstly, I would like to start with the Group A, Melissa Fleming's speech, which was so emotional, so touchy, and I highly empathize with the workers in the field, and we cannot thank enough for their work and for their courage and sacrifice. But in an organization, if the organization itself is not functioning well, I think it was a good point, but at the same time, as I'm taking the same what Mr. Dugan said, if there's a spirit to work on and cooperate, the spirit is not enough if the bureaucracy and organization is weak. So Group A, as far as I saw, Group A were more concentrated on how to reform the UN, but how it is doing the achievements. But at the same time, there was lack of arguments on the representativity and how can we reform effectively to have the multilateral national order. And I would like to thank also Group B speakers for mentioning the representativity and the gender equality aspect. I think it is really important and it is part of the representativity. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow, what an intellectual rap battle, and what a terrifying role to be commenting on people that have never done anything than speaking in their lives. So, no, that was not what I wanted to say. But you, wow, okay, that was not intended. Yeah, okay, the clock is ticking, so let me come to the point. I was listening as a curious master student and was thinking, did you answer the questions that we actually raised in our seminar rooms? Well, for the group arguing for the UN, I think you've done a very good job because you were telling the stories, and we need more of those stories. You talked about what the UN is about. It's about the simple emotions of people, family, safety, people delivering for people, saving lives, justice, peacekeepers risking their lives. And this is at the core of the UN, and that's why we need to ask the other group, who will do this, who will tell these stories, if not the United Nations organization, if not the United Nations? Yes, and Group B, okay. Okay, one question, who will do this job if not the United Nations? Yes, you argued in favor of the United as well. Yes, please, we want the Climate Council, we want a female Secretary General, but we need the people with the courage and resistance to implement that. And that's why my last point is, I was thinking when I heard you, what would my dear friends back home said that fled war, etc. They can't. We need conversations that are actually at the core of what will we do about it. Like, what are your 2 actions that you will do to implement your vision? We want to hear that to get precise answers. Thank you.
Excellent. Beautifully put. And I'm sure you've paid a lot of attention to this. We're now going to have a 2-minute break, very short break. You are going to confer, think about what you've heard, decide which one of you, for each side of the motion, will do the final rebuttal, for which you will have 2 minutes. So we're nearly at the conclusion. We're going to have a 2-minute break. They're going to come back, and then we're going to vote. Then it's you have to decide. So. Who's going to do your... That was a very generous 2 minutes. I would like the nominated debaters to come up to the podium. So, yeah. You each have 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes maximum, 2.5 minutes maximum to make your concluding remarks. And well, let's wait for the clock to get ready. And go.
Okay, well, these are concluding remarks in response to these amazing summaries and questions by our jurors. And also a little bit of response to our other group. And I'd just like to say, Antonio, you sound exactly like the other Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the United Nations, because he also says that the UN workers are professionals who are doing their best to make the world a better place. And he also is fighting for gender equality and has called for a next Secretary General who is female. So this is extremely important. Also, this Secretary General, who I would argue presides over an organization that does, can be bureaucratic, but I would never call it weak. It is effectively delivering on all of the points I made in my initial statement. And it has undergone a number of reforms to innovate its systems, to consolidate, to coordinate, and also to strengthen its presence in the field, in the areas where we serve our people. So, and then finally, you asked, you said that it was touching that I tell stories. Well, I believe that the UN is responsible for saving and changing and lifting the lives of millions of people around the world. And as you asked, who would tell those stories if it weren't for the UN? And maybe it's better to ask, who would save those lives if it weren't for the UN? Thank you.
Well, our side seeks your support. So obviously the future depends upon the youth movement, your involvement. You are on the tipping point of systemic change on behalf of international organization as a concept and hopefully individual international organizations. Yes, we had a summit of the future. You have to be the summit of the present. Tell us where we are now. Describing what we are is how we can understand to explain it and then maybe predict outcomes based on action. So let's think about a summit of the present. It's harder to predict the present than it is the future, I assure you. It takes a lot of soul searching, and that's the last thing most of us want to spend our time doing. Now, I came last night and heard the introduction as to why the Sciences Po was developed originally historically, and I understand it's because it had to demonstrate that French democracy would be strong enough and able to arise and prevail over its autocratic rivals. Well, it's the same at the UN. The democracy of its member states must be able to prevail over entrenched bureaucratic deep state and also be able to prevail over autocratic regimes out there that are willing to try to hijack the UN platform for their own authoritarian ends. So it's a matter of national security for each country to keep the United Nations vibrant, representative, and democratic. So we must keep going, and we must increase our stewardship over an organization, especially as we select the next Secretary General during the course of 2026. And I hope tonight's event has given you a lot of ideas as to what questions and metrics we should apply to that very important selection process, and that you keep it public for us too. Be engaged, entertain debates here on this selection, host the candidates here. Why not? We're going to host them in New York again, I hope. So, in conclusion, if the UN organization does not soon show that it can do both the right thing and the thing right, then who would debate that we need it? Thank you.
Thank you, debating teams. So the time has come for your verdict. Can you feel the tension in the room? I can feel the tension in the room. We've heard tonight about some of the things, perhaps, we've been reminded tonight of all of the attributes of the UN, the depth of the UN, a lot of the hidden stories that the UN are doing every single day, saving lives, providing food, nourishing. But is the UN fit for purpose given today's challenges? So, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, the motion is, for those that believe that we need the United Nations, please clap now. Thank you. For those of you who do not believe we still need the United Nations, please clap now. Steve, the New York's clapometer is not really working very well. That was close. I think, Arantxa, that the motion, do we still need the United Nations, won it by a very tight margin. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. Please applaud our debaters. And also our jurors for having the courage. And finally, I would like to, on behalf of the New York Times, thank you for allowing us to do this here this evening. For us, this debate format is, as I said at the top of my remarks, very important. It's supposed to be about everything. There's so much nuance today that is missing. And the idea of disagreeing well, but listening intently to both sides of the arguments is something we need to appreciate and cherish. And that is the purpose of these events. So thank you for coming to this. And I hope you have a great day tomorrow. Thank you.